So we are continuing with the Maimah as we have learned Venigleh K'vod Havayah, and you will recall that in the previous section we had a very motivational question asking how is it possible that something which is essentially limited, that is the post-Tzimtzum, how will that allow the light of Mashiach to be revealed in the time to come when, as our verse, the start of the Maimah talks about, and then will the glory of God be revealed. So we brought up a verse and we said, "Va'abartem es Havayah lekecho," that you will serve Hashem, your God. That's Abartem, you will serve the level of Havayah Elokechem, your God. And what you will do in the process of serving, that is by doing Torah mitzvahs, is that we transform the darkness that exists, that is the darkness being the spiritual darkness, into light, into spiritual light, so that the post-Tzimtzum reality of covering and not recognizing God will over time, by doing the process of serving God, mahapchim, we transform the spiritual darkness so that we can become aware of godliness, and we call that nahira, we call that light, and therefore we will say, as that verse which we quoted some time back in the beginning of Eis Dalet, we quoted the idea of B'Yeris Laila and the light, and there will become, the night has become light, has become illuminated. That is to say that and I'm quoting from the previous section, which says Cheshek ba'atzmei meir, that the darkness of the night itself will shine. Now we're using that concept, and that's our answer to that essential question, that how will there be a revelation of light in the post-Tzimtzum era? And the answer is that the darkness will be transformed to light, and so therefore in the words and utilizing the words that we've said before, the Tzimtzum itself will become elevated and transformed, that it becomes a light of the class of infinite light, so that it itself will become revealed. And that is the process of doing, or this is the process of what we're doing via all the immeasurable amounts of Torah mitzvahs that we've been studied since the time of the giving of the Torah. And that way, the level which is the light, the infinite light, the Venigleh K'vod, will be able to shine forth, because the existence as we know it post Tzimtzum will have been refined itself via all the mitzvahs that we have been doing. So that's basically what we've been talking about in the previous classes. So it won't be that the Tzimtzum will then will conceal Hashem's light, but in fact, the Tzimtzum, having been elevated, will actually become a source of light, because it is a light, but it'll now become an elevated light. And that way the infinite dimension of the Ein Sof, of the light of the Ein Sof, will be able to be revealed. So as we're starting our new section, the Rebbe then goes deeply into Kabbalah and uses Kabbalah words to go through this transformation capability. Okay, so it starts off as follows. And how can this idea of this transformation that we've talked about, that will become, that will transform the Tzimtzum into light, and in our own personal beings, what is the how will that happen, and how will it be expressed? So he continues, and he says that he talks about the state of existence prior to Tzimtzum, and we use a common expression in Chassidus to explain the differential. And he says, the difference between the state of being of that, the status and the spiritual status of existence prior to Tzimtzum taking an effect, and by studying what is the state of the world, the state of existence post the Tzimtzum, we utilize the expression shekedem Tzimtzum elakus hu b'shitas, that prior to Tzimtzum taking effect, godliness was understood in a pshitas sense. Pshitas meaning a reality of oneness and coalescence and joining, where everything is perceived as part of a godliness. So even though literally the word pshitas means a simple, what it means in the spiritual sense, that it means that the perception of your own reality is totally the perception of godliness. So you have a godliness framework. So as an example, with the idea of, let's say, as an example, a physical example in the case of a concert where you might have an orchestra leader and the orchestra itself, in the middle of the flow of all the energy that's in the recital of or in the production of the music that comes out from the orchestra and the leader, the orchestra's individuality becomes submerged in the leader, and it becomes like one total entity, and in such that you don't recognize any of the individual instruments and their input to the entire musical ensemble. You just feel the emotion and flow of everything that's going on. That's the idea, that everything, all the individuality has become absorbed into the oneness of the music. So therefore, everything has become part of the pshitas of the music and of the musical experience that's happening. That differentiates itself to the next expression that we use, that while everything is flowing, godliness is in a state of oneness, and that's the feeling of everything. So any individuality is something not part of what's happening. Any individuality of any part of the orchestra is not noticed. So therefore we say metzias, that is something aside from godliness, bischatshus. That's bischatshus literally means something new. It's not part of really what's happening. It's a surprise. It doesn't really exist. What exists is the flow and the emotion of all the music, and everything melds together. That's the idea of pre-Tzimtzum. But post-Tzimtzum, when Tzimtzum came into effect, and the idea was to be able to bring about the existence of independent entities and the feeling of independence amongst all the different entities, then we have the opposite status. We have, and the mimer continues with using that expression, Achra Tzimtzum, after Tzimtzum, post Tzimtzum, Nasa Metzias Pshitas. The feeling of Metzias, that means the feeling of independent entities. That's Pshitas, that's the one that is noted, and that's the one that's the idea that everything is understood. But Elokus, but godliness, the melding of everything into the oneness, that's Bezchachas, that is the surprise. That's what's not regular. So the idea, so going back to that comparison of the leader and the orchestra, so then when the flow of music goes and all of a sudden something starts to do, one instrument does a solo piece, or one part of, or the wind group of instruments then you notice the wind instruments, and they become, and they stand out. So their individuality stands out. And then when one particular lead amongst that group will be louder and have been more emphasized, then that particular instrument becomes the leading thing. So therefore, that's an analogy to the idea that the Metzias, the individuality, that's the norm, that's the obvious, that's the reality. While running as a team, the orchestra as one whole, and just appreciating the flow of music, that's what's unique. It's strange. It's and we say the expression Elokus, godliness becomes Bezchachus. It becomes different. So that's the expression, that's the idea, and that's the expression that's used. Why are we using this expression? Because we're trying to talk about that post-Tzimtzum, the idea of post-Tzimtzum, of the idea of that Tzimtzum, that Elokus is Bepshitas and Metzias is Bezchachus, that will no longer be a surprise, because after doing the service, the status of post-Tzimtzum, which is where Metzias is Beshitas and Elokus is Bezchachus, godliness is surprising. The world will become transformed, and then Elokus will no longer be as Chachus. It will no longer be a surprise. It will no longer be something which is not regular, but that will become the norm. That Elokus will become the norm. So we will transform ourselves we will transform the post-Tzimtzum reality to look like the pre-Tzimtzum reality. Now the Rebbe's going and now going even further and being more detailed, but using Kabbalistic language. Ha'inyan b'zeh she'helam ha'tzimtzum pe'el gam ma'hamedregas nailas b'yeser. The reality is that when Tzimtzum got initiated, this affected the hiding of godliness, even at the most sublime levels, at the most highest levels, which are the most lofty in our description. And he goes, and then the revelation of light, even on those levels, is not the same as it is in the essence of godliness, and to the extent, and we're going to give an example that when the loftiest levels were in the state of pre-Tzimtzum, that is when Elokus was when Elokus was B'Yispashtus. So the highest levels were like as well were like at the spiritual levels of being within God's essence. But post Simsum, the changes occurred, and what's the change? And he says, Inyan Bezer, the idea that he is teaching is that what did change? What was the change that made post Simsum that Elokus to be his chadshus and Metzias to be pshitas, right? So he says to clarify to understand that further. Inyan Bezer shehelam at Simsum poil gamba madregas yesen nailas, that the concealment of godliness brought about the changes even at the loftiest level. So the revelation of the light is no longer like it was in the essence itself. And so for the point at the beginning, the most primordial point in existence post Simsum is the idea of the Kav, the ray of light, which was the revelation of godliness post Simsum. So the Rashis Akav, the beginning, the highest point of the light, Shozehu Bechinas Atik to Adam Kadmon. This is called the level of so I will translate the words in a moment, but it's called the level of Atik of Adam Kadmon. Now Adam Kadmon is the primordial man, the first understanding, the first partsuf, the first emanation of godliness via the Kav. Now the highest level of Adam Kadmon is a level which is called Keser of the crown of Adam Kadmon. So like on the head of a person sits a crown. This is the idea of a highest point, or even a point which is beyond man at the highest range. And the deepest level of that is called Atik. So the Rebbe is really pointing to the highest and spiritual level post Simtsum, and meaning the initial revelation of godliness that came by the Kav, and even that, and that the point was affected. And as it's written in Eitz Chaim, that this is the highest level. Eitz Chaim is a book of Kabbalah. Sheyesh b'dugmas atik le'ela megalgalta the Adam Kadmon, that there is a level comparable to the level of atik which we have in the neshama, and in the idea of, in an idea which is beyond what's called the Galgalta of Adam Kadmon, when the Galgalta literally means the skull, but just as the skull, we use that expression in Kabbalah because just as the skull covers the brains of a human being, so also that is the high point of a human being. So in the man proxy paradigm of godliness, Golgalta of Adam Kadmon is the highest level. The point that we're trying to say is that even that highest level identified by the Kabbalah books of Eitz Chaim, which is the highest or first revelation of godliness post Simsum, even that was affected, as he says next. This was affected via Simsum. Hine gam shom, even there yeshna helam Simsum. The Simsum affected that, and that is to say, how did it affect it? How was the spiritual status affected? She'ena kamesha hu be'etzem mamish. It now became a spiritual status, a spiritual environment, which was no longer like it was pre-Tzimtzum, where godliness was everywhere and in all the spiritual levels. So now he goes on to say that he wants to give a parallel to this idea when in discussing the spiritual worlds. The point, but it's probably a good idea just to pause a little bit at this point and try to say what is the goal of what the Rebbe's teaching is at this point. The goal is that the Rebbe is saying that post-Tzimtzum nothing remained the same, and even the highest levels of spirituality were affected by by the Tzimtzum. So even the highest levels of the Kav were affected by the Tzimtzum, and we will, and I suppose we will, and we want to say that at the end of this, right, we will, at the end of the time of when God will bring Mashiach, we will have elevated the infrastructure of the spiritual worlds such that it will be returned back to its to way that it can receive the godliness, and that what Tzimtzum won't have affected it. Okay, so so that's where we're going. So as I've been saying, so this first lines of this section is describing the effect of Tzimtzum on the highest realms of spirituality in Seder Ishtalshlus, in the spiritual realm, even immediately post Tzimtzum, and we've used some Kabbalistic technical terms. So what he said is that the Tzimtzum affected the revelation and the appreciation of godliness even at the highest levels. Why is he saying? What point is he trying to bring across? That I'm looking for an analogy, and I probably won't be 100% correct in it, but the analogy that I will try to pick and try to teach is that you imagine an artist. An artist works in an abstract world. He tries to bring the beauty of the world and tries to put it on a canvas. That's part of what an artist does, right? So there is one artist, and there's other artists as well. So the artists, are a body or group of themselves, right? But and then there is other people who appreciate art. Person who is an artist, though, really knows what the artist is doing. So it would seem to me that I could use an analogy and say that even when a fellow colleague of an artist sees a artwork and it's not being explained by the original artist, so even though he knows how to do it, and he knows how to interpret it, and he knows how to, he's a colleague. He's articulate in all the aspects of art. Nevertheless, once it leaves the mind of the artist and it's now on a canvas, and for the artist it represents the embodiment of what it sees in mind. When a person sees it, whether it be an ordinary member of the public, or even if it's a member of his own group of artists, a colleague, or someone who's on an equal level, or perhaps even better than him, right? But he won't be able to comprehend it because a level of obscurity has come. It's been transferred. It's been transferred on from the artist's mind to the work, and now it's open to the public, and therefore it can be seen. So there's a level of hiddenness. I'm trying to give a moshel, trying to give an analogy for the idea of Tzimtzum. It's gone through a paradigm shift. It's now transformed itself. Another person sees it. So he doesn't know the fullness of what was in the artist's mind, right? So even if a colleague or someone who's on par of the original artist sees it, it's still not exactly the same as the concept of the artist is, without showing it, showing it into the public, or as it might exist still even prior to putting it on canvas in the artist's mind. This is the idea of Tzimtzum, or this is, to me, this is an analogy for the idea for the idea of Tzimtzum. So what he's doing in the flow of this section of the Maimar is he's giving you different analogies from the different spiritual states and positions within the godly structure of existence. And he is saying that the Tzimtzum has affected not only the level where you and me live on a physical realm where we don't see godliness open, but even on spiritual realms, the Tzimtzum has affected so that godliness is not apparent, and even to the highest levels of revelation are the highest levels of spiritual revelations, to the point where it is the most immediate point post Tzimtzum, that is the beginning of the Kav. He said, Reishis HaKav, the beginning of the Kav. Even there, the Tzimtzum has taken effect and is no longer the same. And the revelation of godliness is no longer the same. That is to say that it will exhibit at all the different levels that he's going to say in the continuum of the Maimar, as it is at the highest level, that it no longer is in a state of Elakus or B'shittas, where godliness is the one combining thing, and Metzias and entities and existence is something out of the ordinary. But as soon as Tzimtzum happened, the idea of that Elakus is B'yischadshus and Metzias is the Pshittas, right? That's taken effect even in the highest realms. So the Rebbe in the Maimar first has given the highest point in spheres. Now he's going to give an example in the realm of the spirit of the four spiritual worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya, and is going to say that in that framework of the four worlds, where Atzilus is the highest, as soon as Atzilus, as there's a radiation of Atzilus into the lower worlds, there is a change of status in terms of spirituality, and it will become, as we said before, that within the framework of Atzilus, where Atzilus is the place of open revelation in relative to the spiritual level that we're talking about, that Atzilus is the highest level, and therefore the place where Elokus is B'Pshitas and Metzias is B'Yischadshus. As soon as there's an influence of spirituality of Atzilus into the next rung of the worlds lower, that is into Bria, it will it will show the idea of, it will show the idea that there's been a transformation, and that, or then it becomes that Metzias is the norm, and Elokus is Bizchadshus. Okay, so that's what that's where we're going, and that's what we're the next part, the next lines of the Maimon talk about. Okay, so
yes.
Yeah, so the idea of Kesser that we will introduce, which we'll read shortly, is that there is a intermediary interface between each of the major levels, and that intermediary level is generically called Kesser of that level. So there is a Kesser of the four worlds, and that acts as the interface or the intermediary between one level and the next level.
So it's sort of an interface.
So the interface, the Kesser of each world, is really connected to the lowest point of the higher world and the highest point of the lower world, which is where it's transforming. So the interface has something in common with the lowest spiritual level of an upper world and the highest level of the lower world, and that's how it acts as an interface. And it's generically called the Kesser level. So the flow of the Maimon will say that even though we are talking about, in this context, the higher level, nevertheless that higher level has become influenced by the Tzimtzum reduction of light. So the point that we're trying to express is that that there has been a reduction of light as we transformed, and even the highest point of that world, which is receiving the light, has been affected by the Tzimtzum. So it's not just that it's not just the lower levels which are affected by Tzimtzum, but even the highest levels are affected by Tzimtzum. And going back to the analogy that I gave with the artist and his colleagues are of equal power as he himself, but they can't understand, or they're affected by the Tzimtzum, that is the reduction of light by virtue of putting pen to paper or putting the artistry on the canvas and showing to them, because it's reduced from how it exists in his brain or how it exists prior to his having it revealed. They don't understand it as he's projecting it. So that it has become a diminution of the essential core of the idea. So also when the light of Hashem transforms over from one spiritual level to the next level, it's affected by the tzimtzum of going down from one level to the next level, and even the highest point of that level is affected by virtue of the tzimtzum itself. That's our point.
Do you remember that we studied how
Shem Shabrius Aprotius, to give an example, when we talk about the second of the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Sirasiya. So when we talk about Bria, Hine Bechinas Atik, the Bria, so when the Atik of Bria, Shanasa Bechinas Malchus, the Atzilus, that is the Atik of Bria, the highest point of the interface between Atzilus and Bria, that is to say that the lowest point of Atzilus, as it reaches and becomes the highest point of Bria. So it is Malchus of Atzilus and becomes and influences the Atik, the level of Atik of Bria. Shemislabish, and that this level of what we just said, Malchus Atzilus, becomes enclosed in the Keser of the world of Bria, and then becomes it becomes enclosed in the levels of spheres of Bria. So it becomes enclosed into the Keser, Chochmah, and Bina of Bria. In that state of existence, they've become diminished. Hari Eina Kamei Atzilus Mamash. Even though it is the same light, but they're not in the same level of status, or they're not the same level of existence. And they have become I'll use the word tainted. They've become reduced in its level of spirituality, because they're taking on some of the aspects of Bria. So it's no longer the same as it existed in Atzilus itself. And Kamei Kain Hu Gam B'Bria Saklolis. So this same concept applies if we map the four worlds, the proxy idea of the four worlds, into the proxy idea of the four general worlds called the Olamus Klolis, and Bria Klolis is from Adam Kadmon to lower. So it becomes mapped into Adam Kadmon is mapped into Bria, Keser is mapped into Yetzira, and Atzilus is mapped into Atzilus the Klolis is mapped into the level of Asiya Klolis. So the level of Atik Shala Eilam Adam Kadmon. So as we said before, that even though we have the level of Atik, which is beyond the level of Adam Kadmon, but it is post Simtsum, even that, as we expressed a few lines before, Eina Commercial Be'etzem Mamish is no longer like how it existed when it existed in the essence of Hashem in a post Simtsum state, because in a pre-Simtsum state, because once it's gone into a post Simtsum state, even at the highest level, where it's like what I said, well, in my comparison, I made it to like the colleagues of the artist, is no longer at the level of on the level of the artist himself. It's now become reduced and not at the same and not at the same level. So it is no longer like it was, as we said before, at the beginning of the like it was, even though it's at the beginning of the kav, it's at Reishis HaKav, the beginning of the kav, but notwithstanding that, even though it's at Reishis HaKav, it's not like how it was pre the Tzimtzum. And B'hainu shegam b'china zu yesh nehelam at Tzimtzum, because at this level, the effect of Tzimtzum has now started, and then there is a level of coveredness or hiddenness of spiritual light that has now been introduced. So at those two levels, or these comparisons that we've been making, we have changed the status so that what was the pshittas has now become ischatshus. So therefore, to say Marsha Matzias b'pshittas, and therefore they've post the Tzimtzum, what's the status and the the perceived reality of the spiritual level has now become Masha Metzias B'Pshitas. It's become that Metzias, that exists, that independence, existence other than God has now become the norm, is now become B'Pshitas, and Elokus and godliness is B'Yischachus, is out of the norm, is a new idea. Kamei Kain Hu Behefresh Gam B'Neshomas. Now the Rebbe starts with another example of this same idea, that in the soul, in the quality of souls themselves, in the neshama experience, some neshamas, as they existed prior to the level of pt6a, before the sin of eating of the tree of knowledge, the sin that Adam Arishan did, the neshamas, how they existed in a pristine state prior to the pt6a, are not like the neshamas, their level of spirituality post the pt6a. And that's what our words say. Similarly, there's a difference in neshamas. Prior to the sin of Adam Arishan, gam miyad la'achar v'gam miyad la'achar achet hayeh l'kus. Gam miyad la'achar achet, and even after the sin, hayeh l'kus b'shitas. But then Hashem changed things, and Kamesha Kosev, as it says, v'yishma es keil havayah lakim es halach began, that the Adam Arishan was at the height of his level. He could hear, as it says, the voice of Hashem Alakim going in the garden, meaning that he could perceive godliness. Shahaya Kael Hashem Medaber im Odom Began Eden, and the voice of Hashem spoke directly to man. In other words, there was a revelation of godliness directly to mankind, to Adam Arishan. So there hadn't been a diminution of spirituality yet. But post that, Hashem introduced the concealment of godliness, Nasa Helen, he made hiddenness, and therefore at that point, Metzias B'Pshitas, then Metzias, independent existence other than God, became the norm. And ve'elokus b'yischachus, and godliness is the new revelation and has to be learned.
So Helen is concealment. Sorry. Helen.
So we'll end off the session at this point. But I would just as a summary, how the Maimah started was that the idea of Tzimtzum has affected the status of the world's understanding of spirituality, even at the highest levels, and that at all points of the spirituality, at the highest point, and even on the different worlds point, and even in the individual reactions of the spiritual worlds, and even this on the level of the individual souls, neshamas, prior to the Chet and post the Chet, which is the personal tzimtzum of the worlds, they have become affected, and there's been the change of status as we've described it, that we've changed the status from Elokus being Pshitas and Metzias being Yischachus to now the existence and perception of that Metzias is the permanent reality, and that the idea of Elokus is Ischachus, and godliness is Ischachus, is different. So we've changed, so we've come into that state, but the thrust of the Maimah is that by doing our service to Hashem, we will come back to the idea of that 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 Elokus is b'pshitas and Metzias is b'yischadshus. But that's a slow process, as we've talked about through the service of God. That the idea that, as we said, the verse in the previous verse, that the job of mankind is to serve Hashem, and that was the job that Adam Rishon was given in the Gan Eden, to serve Hashem. That is the role of mankind, to serve Hashem, and by doing that, we will make the Tzimtzum a vessel in itself to reveal light. So with that, we can finish the learning for this session, and we will continue and finish off where we're going to talk about that there is some exceptions to what we've just said that is being affected by the Tzimtzum, and we will talk about that there are some neshomas which are not affected. However, we will discuss that next time we meet. But the ultimate goal, as we have understand that the world has changed and we're repairing the world. Okay, so we'll end the session. We'll end the session there now.